مصالح بود.
Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. What's going on in the Ukraine? Like, what the heck is going on in Ukraine, Russia, etc.? And so I wanted to invite in Marcus Kolga, who is a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, an expert on Eastern European issues in general. Has been, I guess, Marcus, you're actually from Lithuania, I think it was.
Estonia.
Estonia, I apologize. And you have really done your whole career on understanding what's going on in Eastern Europe and particularly with Russia. So tell me, Putin has announced that he has recognized these two breakaway regions of Ukraine. He's actually now invaded those regions. The U.S., Canada, the U.K., Western Europe, the EU have declared lots of constraints on them. What do you think is happening? Are we going to enter World War II? World War III?
Well, it seems like we're headed that way. Vladimir Putin seems determined to take his country to war and to confront the West. As you mentioned, we've seen Vladimir Putin over the past few days declare the independence of the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. This is an area of Ukraine that was also invaded in 2014. So it's really been under attack from Russian and Russian-supported forces for the past 7 years. It's always been sort of in this in-between space that's not fully independent. But now that Russia has declared that it is going to recognize its independence, it is moving forces into that region. There is a contact line in between that runs through that Eastern European province of Donbass. The question is whether he will take his troops to that line or whether he will cross it into Ukrainian-held territory in Donbass. If he does that, it looks almost certain that there will be an armed conflict, that there will be bloodshed.
With regular Ukraine forces?
That's right.
So right now, I understand there is fighting going on, but it's between separatist forces within this Donbass region and non-regular Ukrainian forces that are resistance forces. Is that the case?
No, they're Ukrainian forces, and let's be very clear that the Western media has called them separatist forces. They are de facto Russian forces. These are forces that have been armed by the Russian government. They've been trained by the government, and in most cases, they're former Russian army officers, special forces officers, who have now become part of this militia, very well-trained, highly trained militia and highly armed militia. And so for the past 7 years, they've actually been shelling Ukrainian positions. And so now what's happening is that Russia is augmenting those forces. They're sending in tanks, artillery, missiles and such into that region that's being held by these Russian-backed militias, and it looks like we are headed towards a conflict.
I apologize for using the analogy, but isn't this like Austria or Czechoslovakia in late 1930s?
Well, I think as far as the geopolitical situation is concerned, yeah, it's not unlike that sort of a situation. We have a very one-sided conflict. We have Vladimir Putin, who has created this crisis on his borders over the past 6 to 7 months. Again, 2014 is when he first invaded Ukraine. But over the past 6 months, he has escalated that situation. He's engaged in this rapid mobilization. And it's clear that he is determined to grab this land.
Why? Why is he doing this?
Well, there are several reasons. First of all, his popularity at home is very low. He's polling somewhere in the 30s, perhaps lower. If officially he's polling in the 30s, but that would mean he's polling probably in the teens or in the 20s somewhere. He's really failed to make any progress domestically with regards to the prosperity of Russians. Incomes have fallen precipitously over the past 10 years.
So he thinks war is going to escalate his popularity?
Well, he needs a distraction. He needs a distraction from his failures at home, and so he's creating this spectacle of a war, so that Russians, instead of focusing on the empty refrigerators that they have at home, they'll focus on the television and this war. And he's done this over the past 22 years. He's manufactured crisis after crisis after crisis to divert attention away from the other problems that the everyday problems that Russians have, and to boost his own popularity. So he needs a crisis like this in order to remain in power. He's also looking in the mirror, and he's now approaching 70. He's extended his potential stay as leader of Russia from now 22 years up until 2035. And he's thinking about his legacy. He sees himself, when he looks in the mirror, who he's standing beside is people like Joseph Stalin, Peter the Great. And so in order to fully cement that legacy, he needs to expand that territory, Russian territory. He needs to restore the imperial power of Russia to the Soviet era and the Tsarist era. If you're going to do that, you're going to need to pull in Ukraine. That's the first country you're going to have to occupy. In his unhinged speech earlier this week, he also made some warnings to other former territories that were occupied by the Soviet Union, the Baltic states, for example. Belarus has been now de facto occupied by the Russian army, very quietly over the past 3 weeks. So he needs to expand that territory. He wants to restore the Soviet Union for his own legacy, and to maintain that power that he has and that he's trying to consolidate.
So, it's possible that he could amalgamate with or absorb Belarus. Maybe
Seems that way.
The Donbass region, Crimea, already has. But he's not going to, NATO's never going to let him take the Baltic states, are they?
Well, it's this sort of inch by inch strategy that Vladimir Putin has. Right now it's the Donbass
Hitler had
region.
in the 1930s.
That's right. And so right now, what he's doing in Ukraine is really one of three things. We talked about two of them. He's also testing our mettle. He's checking to see if we are really serious about standing up to Ukraine, because he's had several conflicts over the past 10 years where NATO has really, and the community of Western democracies have failed to stand up against Vladimir Putin. And so if we fail to stand up with some real hard-hitting sanctions, and a few were announced just on Tuesday, sanctions against some banks, against those members of Russian parliament who voted to recognize Donbass. That's all fine and dandy, but a lot of those deputies, they don't have assets in the West. Those banks, a lot of those assets that Putin had there have been cleared out. I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin is going to take those sanctions very seriously. And if we don't hit serious sanctions on his wealth, on the corrupt oligarchs who enable his power, if we don't target sanctions on them, and really send more lethal defensive weapons for Ukraine and bolster the forces that we have in the Baltic states with NATO, I'm not sure that he's going to take us very seriously. And that's when he's going to start testing us in the Baltics. It could be Narva in eastern Estonia. It's a city that's primarily populated with Russian speakers. Latgale in eastern Latvia. Places like that. He may move troops in a few kilometers and take that territory simply to test NATO. And so we need to be very well prepared, because he's demonstrated that he's willing to use force to take territory, and I'm sure that he's done it once, he'll definitely do it again. So we need to be prepared for that moment.
So what about the argument that some of these territories are Russian, that they speak Russian, that they were part of the USSR, that historically they may have been part of Russia? Is there any validity to that argument?
There's absolutely no validity whatsoever. This is sovereign territory. It's being recognized by the United Nations and the international community more broadly. These eastern territories in the Baltic states, there are certainly Russian speakers there, but those Russian speakers have no interest in becoming full-time Russian citizens again. They are very happy living inside Estonia, inside Latvia, part of the European Union. They are prosperous there. When they look across the border, they see the fact that their their brothers and sisters in Russia are not making the same sort of incomes. They're not earning the same sort of incomes as they do at home. There was a recent report by the Russian Auditor General just 2 years ago that claimed that 1 in 3 Russian hospitals doesn't even have running water.
One in 3 Russian hospitals doesn't even have
it doesn't even have
water?
running water. And so those Russian speakers who are living in Estonia and Latvia are quite happy living in Estonia and Latvia, being Estonian and Latvian citizens, but Russian speakers.
So I've done work in Kiev and Ukraine, and I think we chatted about this previously.
That's right.
And there were banks that were Russian banks, and there were banks that were Ukrainian or Western banks, and there were politicians that you talked to that were, everyone referred to them as the Russian politicians or the Ukrainian Western politicians, and the Western part of Ukraine really felt very different than the eastern part of Ukraine. It was almost as if there was a river down the middle of Ukraine separating out the Russian portion from the Ukrainian portion, and some portions of Western Ukraine felt almost like a different country than the balance of Ukraine. And I've been told that some Ukrainians in Canada are some of the most fervent nationalistic Ukrainians that you can find anywhere in the world. So, was part of Ukraine really Russian? For 50 years, wasn't it?
Sure, there are Russian speakers in Ukraine. There are Ukrainian speakers in Ukraine. If you speak to the Russian speakers in the eastern sections of Ukraine, certainly some of them have an affinity towards Russia. That's part of their culture. But if you ask most of those Russians whether they would prefer to be part of Ukraine or whether they would prefer to be Russia, they prefer to be part of Ukraine. They understand that Ukraine is headed towards a road that leads to Europe, which leads to prosperity. And the road to Russia, if they were to accept that future, that is a gray and dark road that at the end of which there is very little prosperity. There's only repression. There is no freedom, and they understand that. They don't.
Does religion play a role? Because there's a Ukrainian Catholic Church and a Russian Orthodox Church, is there not?
That may play a role. That's part of their cultural identity and part of their traditions. But I don't think that plays into those political choices nowadays. Really, it's not as important as seeing personal freedoms, the sovereignty of their nation, the freedom to make their own personal choices. Whereas looking at Russia, that you just don't have that same sort of freedom.
After World War II, really, I guess it was at Yalta or something like that, where the West and Russia carved up most of Europe into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union and the West. And so that is sort of one legal framework. And then there was another legal framework, I think it was called the Minsk Accord or something like that, when Ukraine gave back nuclear weapons to Russia. But wasn't there a dedication at that time that Russia would never invade or would respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine?
Great question. It's one that I think all Canadians need to bear in mind, is that the Budapest Memorandum, which is what you're referring to, this was an agreement between Ukraine, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, whereby, you're right, Ukraine agreed to give up all of its nuclear weapons in return for a guarantee of its territorial sovereignty. All 4 parties signed it. And with this agreement, or with this decision just this week, of recognizing the independence of the Donbass region and the fact that Putin is invading that area and putting Russian forces in there, it goes against every part of that agreement. And so, yeah, it's a violation of international law, what Putin is doing right now in Donbass.
But after 2014, there was another agreement that was entered into that obliged Ukraine to do something in regards to those eastern breakaway regions, wasn't it not?
Right, and the basis of that agreement was a ceasefire, and for both sides to stop shooting at each other. The Russian side, these Russian-backed militias, have violated that ceasefire countless times every single day,
right,
for the past 7 years. It also guaranteed a certain degree of autonomy for Donbass, the freedom for the people there to make some of their own political choices. We have to remember that agreement was signed at the barrel of a gun. Ukraine was suffering in 2014. They needed a ceasefire because they could not sustain that sort of level of conflict with Russia. And so they signed it. I think that Ukraine mostly adhered to that agreement, but so Vladimir Putin's decision this week has completely torn that up, and there is no more Minsk agreement at this point.
Where do we go from here?
That's a really good question. I think that Canada needs to start taking a serious look at sanctions. We have Russian oligarchs. These are the corrupt oligarchs who enable Vladimir Putin, and there are many reports that a lot of these that claim that a lot of these oligarchs actually hold his wealth abroad. We know that there are several oligarchs, one or two at least, who have upwards of $500 million, up to maybe more than $1 billion in assets hidden in plain sight right here in Canada. We need to target those individual oligarchs, then their companies, and the assets they hold. We need to freeze those assets to send Vladimir Putin a message that we won't stand for this sort of aggression.
Do you think these oligarchs will be able to, if they hurt, change Putin's mind?
I would think so. These are the richest oligarchs in Russia. They are very close to Vladimir Putin. If Vladimir Putin cannot protect their wealth, I suspect that, I think Vladimir Putin himself understands that his power will be at risk and threatened if he isn't able to protect them.
So the oligarchs could overturn Putin or could take power away from Putin?
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. And I think that Vladimir Putin's own irrational behavior over the past few weeks makes me wonder what is actually going on in Moscow. Is there some sort of a challenge to his power right now? And if we can push the oligarchs through various different sanctions, we might see a change in a very sudden change in Vladimir Putin's behavior.
We're chatting about Ukraine tonight. Fascinating conversation. We're going to take a break and come back more in just a couple of minutes. Stay with us, everybody.
रोशन, तू फिर पाकिस्तान आ गया?
क्या करूं भाईजान, इधर के काम ही नहीं खत्म होते।
छोटा मुंह बड़ी बात करने लगा हूँ।
खैर ये तो आप तकल्लुफ ही कर रहे हैं।
बड़ी अहम बात है, गौर से सुन। दुबई वापस जाते ही ऑनलाइन रोशन डिजिटल अकाउंट खुलवाओ।
ये जो बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने शुरू किया हुआ है?
हाँ, स्टेट बैंक ऑफ पाकिस्तान की हदायत पर ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानियों के लिए सहूलत है। इधर देख, प्रदेश से घर के बिल अदा करने हो, पैसे भिजवाने हो, नया पाकिस्तान सर्टिफिकेट या स्टॉक मार्केट में सरमायाकारी करनी हो, गाड़ी निकलवानी हो, अपने घर के लिए कर्ज चाहिए हो, सब हो सकता है। इसके अलावा 24 घंटे ऑनलाइन बैंकिंग की सहूलत भी।
बस बस बस, मेरे सारे मसले हल हो गए। बस अब शादी रह गई।
तो आप अभी www.bop.com.pk विजिट करें और अपना रोशन डिजिटल अकाउंट बिल्कुल मुफ्त खुलवाएं। बैंक ऑफ पंजाब, रखे हर फर्द का ख्याल।
रहे ना रहे। I am Jawad Ahmed and I am coming to Toronto to celebrate Pakistan Day, organized by Urban Wave Promotion, Arsalan Beg in association with Super Visa insurance expert Mavish Beg. It is going to be held on Saturday, 26th of March 2022. Come with families and enjoy the event. The event will be held at Capital Banquet Hall, Mississauga. See you there.
Do you want to start your own business in Canada? Is it your dream to own a gas station? Would you like to invest in a residential development?
If yes, then you need to contact Mirza Zulfikar Chaudhry, one of the best residential and commercial brokers in the community, broker of Global West Realty Limited. Call him at 416-908-1575.
We specialize in commercial and residential developments. We just developed this Esso gas station with Pizza Hut. If you are interested in any kind of development, commercial or residential, please contact us with full confidence.
Mirza Zulfikar Chaudhry, broker of Global West Realty. Phone number 416-908-1575.
Hi, I'm Brian Crombie, and we're going to be talking on The Brian Crombie Show. We're going to be talking about politics, arts, business, and social issues on The Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV, having a really interesting conversation tonight about Ukraine and what's going on. Give me a little bit of a sense, Marcus, if you could, of your background. So you've been with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for 7 years, you said?
About 7 years,
Yeah?
that's right.
And how did you've got a political science background, or what's your background?
I have a political science background. I also have a background in journalism and filmmaking. With regards to Russia and Ukraine, I started working with the Russian pro-democracy and pro-human rights movement, I don't know, around 2008, 2009 or so, and tried to figure out ways to support that movement with the understanding of the direction that Vladimir Putin was headed in already back in 2007 when he tried to destabilize Estonia with some manufactured riots. And then, of course, in 2008, he attacked Georgia. And so, you know, my view was that Vladimir Putin doesn't really represent Russia. He did not exclusively. That there is another Russia. And indeed there is. There is a large group of Russians who want democracy, who want a European future
Certainly
for
what
Russia.
we all thought when
Sure, in the
Gorbachev
1990s.
was in power, and even Yeltsin.
That's right, and that all changed, of course, in 2000 when Vladimir Putin came to power. He's a KGB man through and through. He was raised basically as a single child and brought up through the KGB system. And when he came back to power in 2000, he reawakened those old organs, those repressive organs of the Russian state that we thought had disappeared when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s. He brought those back. And that campaign of repressing freedom of expression. Let's not forget that Russia per capita had the most independent newspapers and media outlets throughout the late 1990s.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very vibrant information environment and free and open. That all changed in the early 2000s. And by 2006, Vladimir Putin had raided and closed down all of the independent television stations, had taken them over. They're now all state-run. And managed to repress the pro-democracy movement. By 2012, he was violently repressing them. You know, in 2015, my close friend Boris Nemtsov, who, you know, could have been Russia's president in 2000 if Boris Yeltsin had made a different decision, and I think that Russia's future would have been quite different had Boris Nemtsov been made president. He was shot down, gunned down, for being such a vocal and effective supporter of democracy. He was gunned down with 7 shots on February 27th in 2015, right in front of the steps of the Kremlin. And so this repressive nature of this regime has just grown. The revanchist sort of imperialism has grown, and that's what's brought us. Over 22 years, we've come from a Russia that seemed destined for a European future to one that is now looks more like North Korea.
Or Germany in the late 1930s. And I apologize for keep coming back to that as the analogy, but when I think about taking Crimea and taking you know, some separate regions of Donbass, it sounds like Austria and Czechoslovakia to me. And then manufacturing that there were, you know, in the late August of 1939, Hitler was manufacturing things about German-speaking people in Poland being put upon, and that he was going into Poland to try to save them. And it just seems like history is repeating itself. And I worry, what have we learned from history? If we didn't stop at Crimea and we don't stop at Donbass, what have we learned?
Look, you're absolutely right, and we've seen this. We've seen this playbook from the Second World War. We've seen this playbook from Vladimir Putin himself over the past 22 years. We know how he operates. We know that he's pretty much like just a typical schoolyard bully who will take and take and take until somebody stands up and socks it to him in the nose. That's what we need to do. We cannot, every time we appease him, he's going to continue doing this. We're laying out a red carpet for this guy. And let's not forget, you bring up the Hitler analogy, this is a guy that has been going around Europe and elsewhere supporting far-right movements everywhere. He is funding them, he is materially helping them, and we cannot forget that. One of his aims when it comes to our own democracy, is to destabilize it and to turn ourselves against each other, to erode our trust in our elected officials, to erode our trust in our media. When I look at what's happening in Ottawa, I'm really concerned. We know that Russian state media was helping pour fuel onto that fire.
Really?
Absolutely.
Do you think there's funding coming from Russia as well?
I won't say about anything about funding. I'm not sure about that, but Russian state media was absolutely amplifying extremist voices in that protest, voices that were calling for the violent overthrow of our government and the removal of it. Russian state media, it's open for anyone to see. Look at it during the period of that protest. They were amplifying these fringe voices during that protest, and they exploited the divisions and exploited those poor people who were actually there with the best intentions.
I spoke to someone else at your institute, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, that specializes in Asia-Pacific issues, and they said if we don't stop Putin, then China's going to take Taiwan.
Well, that's a great point. I know who you're speaking about, Charles Burton. He's a brilliant thinker when it comes to China. He's absolutely right. China is watching what we do with Vladimir Putin very, very closely. If we don't stand up to Vladimir Putin now, that signals at least a green light to China that we may not stand up for Taiwan when China challenges Taiwan. Or Hong Kong.
Well, I guess we didn't stand up for Hong Kong already.
Well, we didn't, that's right. Or any other part of the Indo-Pacific region. It just gives China a green light to go forward and engage in its own imperialist ambitions.
So you think sanctions have to be harsh, maybe a lot harsher than they are today.
Absolutely.
And really pointed towards some of these oligarchs, particularly the oligarchs in Canada. The use of lethal weapons. So Canada, up until very recently, has been very careful to only have trainers from our military in Ukraine, and I think even those trainers have now left Ukraine. And the only armaments that we put were non-lethal armaments. But just, I guess, a week ago, we agreed that we would arm Ukraine with some lethal armaments. What do you think we need to do now? Should we put forces there? Should we put lethal armaments there? Would Canadians be willing to die in Ukraine or risk death?
Well, look, Ukraine isn't part of NATO, so we aren't obligated to send our forces to defend Ukraine. We are, however, obligated as a NATO member to defend countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, which surprisingly, you wouldn't think that they were under threat, but they are. Russia's been engaging in a mass militarization of the Arctic, and especially right on Norway's borders. We are obligated to defend those countries. So I think that what Canada needs to do is, with regards to Ukraine, we can send them further lethal weapons, especially the anti-tank kind. They need those. If there are any sort of anti-aircraft weapons that we can provide, that would be very helpful. But most importantly, if we really want to stand up to Putin and defend NATO's borders, because NATO's borders, let's not forget, are also Canada's borders.
Yep.
If we want to defend those borders, we need to send more troops and equipment to our mission in Latvia, to support the other missions in Estonia, in Lithuania, and Poland. And we need to work within NATO to establish permanent bases in those countries until we see a change in either Vladimir Putin's behavior or a change in the regime. Because we've seen this over and over again, as we were discussing earlier. We have to learn from history. We know that Vladimir Putin will continue lashing out aggressively against this region.
170,000 troops. Like, there's no way that NATO's going to put 170,000 troops into Ukraine.
No, we are not going to put troops into Ukraine unless the United States, the United Kingdom, NATO agrees to do that. We're not putting troops into Ukraine.
So if he decides, he could take over the country.
He can take the country over. If he decides to do that, he can probably do that within a few days. But the resistance following any sort of offensive to take Kiev, for example, would be fierce. It would last months. It would be bloody. And going back to our earlier discussion about Vladimir Putin's own popularity at home, his popularity cannot withstand tens of thousands of black bags coming home with young Russians in them. That will finish Vladimir Putin.
Does Ukraine have the military might that they could actually kill tens of thousands of Russian soldiers?
They have the military might. They have the training now. It is not the same army that we saw in 2014. They have upgraded their weapons. But most importantly, they are motivated. Ukraine's troops are motivated. Not only are their troops motivated, but their citizens are motivated. They are training for a long-term resistance, and it will be bloody. It will be very costly for Vladimir Putin to invade any further than Donbass. And I think if he's still thinking rationally, and this is if he's still thinking rationally, he understands this, and it's entered into his calculations, and he won't go any further.
It's going to destroy the Russian economy. He may get a little bit of territory, but it's going to destroy the Russian economy.
Well, 50% of his income, of Russia's income, relies on the sale of gas and oil. Oil prices are at historic highs. He is right now laughing. He is generating enormous amounts of wealth and income for his oligarchs through this historically high price of oil. So I think that he can continue to engage, keep his troops on that border for some time, given the price of oil. But you're right, an invasion of Ukraine would be far too costly, I think. And I think politically it would be most costly for Vladimir Putin.
I really appreciate you coming in and telling us about it. If people want to follow you and your writing and your thoughts on this, what's the best way? Is it on Twitter, or what's the best way to follow Marcus?
Twitter is a good place. @Kolga is my handle there. And you can check in at the MacDonald-Laurie Institute. They're always posting any of the articles that I write.
I really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me.
If I could add my 2 cents, I think that we need to learn from history, and I think we haven't learned from history. And what happened at the start of World War II in Munich and Czechoslovakia and Austria, if we don't stand up to Vladimir Putin, I think letting him take Crimea was a mistake. I think that allowing him to invade the Donbass region and take it is a massive mistake. And I think Marcos is right that if we allow him to do this, what's next? Why wouldn't he continue? And so this may not be what we want to hear, and the last thing we want is World War III, but we got to stand up. And I think you're right. The right way to stand up to a bully is to hit him in the face. And you certainly can't give in to a bully. And if we give in to a bully, then, think about what happened in World War II. And World War III with nuclear weapons, I can imagine a conventional warfare where we potentially throw Russia out of Ukraine. But I can't imagine actually invading Russia without triggering something none of us want to think about. Anyway, I think sanctions have got to be unbelievably extreme, and I think that lethal weapons to Ukraine is probably what we need to do right away, even if we're not going to send the army with them to use them, which probably is something that Canadians aren't willing to do right now, but we may need to think about in the future. Anyway, thanks for joining us tonight. That's the Brian Crombie Show on Canada One TV. Good night, everybody.